Cultural Competency e-Portfolio of Yumeka Devereaux. Upon entering the course, we were asked to take a survey that would measure our level of cultural competence. It covered three competence areas: cultural awareness, knowledge acquisition, and skill development, and two levels which were generalist and advanced. The assessment determined by counting the numbers selected in each statement and totaling them together. There were four levels, 1 and 2, in which were the expected level for someone beginning the course. Levels 3 and 4 were expected after the course. After taking the assessment, the results total a score of 125. It was almost embarrassing because I interact with different cultures daily, but I guess being familiar with who they were was totally separate. I was determined to make myself culturally competent throughout the semester to boost my score. Our first official assignment was to focus on two of the several identity groups: dominant or privileged identities and subordinate, also known as oppressed or disadvantaged identities. After focusing on ways I was characterized dominant and subordinate, I concluded I was dominant because I was a parent, heterosexual, and able bodied. As a parent, my children are my subordinates because I am their provider. Providing for my children gives me a feeling of pride in knowing I am capable of being a responsible adult. As a heterosexual, I am dominant over a homosexual because most people identify with heterosexuality, and I can live in comfort knowing other people's assumptions about my sexual orientation are correct. As a heterosexual, I can feel proud to exhibit my intimate relationship openly without being accused of flaunting my sexuality or risking discrimination. As an able body, I am dominant in relation to some with a disability. As an able bodied individual, I feel independent in being capable to make decisions concerning my well being. Being able bodied, I don't have to deal with endless, exhausting streams of attention regarding my disability status. I concluded I was subordinate, being that I am female, African American, and a student. Being a female, I'm subordinate to a male because when going out in public, I would run the risk of being sexually harassed or assaulted, and if victimized, would have to explain my reasoning for being in that particular location. As a female, I am forced to feel weak or unstable because of my gender. As an African American, I'm subordinate in relation to a European American because I am likely to be segregated into communities that isolate African Americans from better jobs, opportunities, schools, and community services. As an African American, I can feel belittled because of my ethnicity. As a student, I'm subordinate in relation to my professor because the professor holds the knowledge that I seek to acquire, and I can rely on him or her to provide me with the resources and skills to do so. As a student, I feel intimidated by the knowledge acquired by the professor, but will use them to my advantage. This assignment allowed me to understand the various views of how I will be identified in society. The in-class discussion allowed me to focus on power differences between various social groups and dealing with denying ways in which I am oppressed or how others are oppressed is dealt with by allowing myself to be mindful of how I treat others. This assignment raised issues of concern when allowing people to feel less or more empowered based on the different views of society. Our second assignment encouraged us to explore how our social location influenced our decision to become social workers and how it shapes our personal values and the willingness to work with certain groups. I'm a small town country girl from the city of Sparta, located in Middle Georgia. I grew up there just before I transitioned to middle school, which was located 30 miles in Eaton, Georgia, outside of our previous location. As a child, the adjustment was hard because I had already developed friends and majority of my family lived there. I'm the middle child of three. I have one older sister who is 14 years older and a younger brother 3 years younger. Like most middle children, I get a bad rep for being outspoken and temperamental. Some people would call me the black sheep of the family because I've always been driven, determined, and seemingly more outgoing than most of my family. Although the middle child, I can be assumed to be the oldest because I have always had a natural instinct to protect and care for my siblings. My mother was a single parent and instilled in us to be independent, respectful, and hardworking. Growing up in a single parent home allowed me to value family because my mom constantly worked to provide for us, so she wasn't always around to dedicate time to us. She worked and was able to provide all the needs and wants, but the lack of attention was left unfulfilled. Even as a child, I knew I wanted to grow up to get a career, get married, and have a huge family. Well, I grew up and my goals were met, just not in the order I planned. My now husband slash best friend and headache and I have two children, twin girls, and I'm currently working on my degree to become a social worker. While analyzing myself, I was fortunate enough to learn about cultures different from my own. I was lucky enough to have the pleasure of meeting and learning about the Ethiopian culture and the Puerto Rican culture. Prior to meeting Bethlehem, I was unfamiliar to the Ethiopian culture. She is a coworker who I've worked with and engaged in casual conversation with, but nothing in relation to her culture. The only depiction of the Ethiopian culture that I knew of was infomercials and on television asking viewers to donate X amount of money to feed what's shown to be tribe-like cultures of malnourished individuals. So when I found out she was Ethiopian, I was at a loss for words, but excited to find out about her culture. I decided to focus on marriage, being that I am newly married, and thought it would be interesting to focus on how cultures perform their ceremonies. Although she is not married, she played a role in her brother's recent ceremony. The ceremony lasts from 2 weeks to a month in celebration, and family plays a huge role in the decision of who will marry. She wanted me to know Ethiopians, particularly her tribe of Amhara, valued family, and the approval from family is extremely important. During the reception, to signify respect, the newly married couple set aside time to kiss the elderly on the knee for honoring their marriage. She provided footage which allowed me to experience the ceremony. After this activity, I was overwhelmed at how incompetent I was before about this group. I felt honored to have had a glimpse of the Ethiopian culture and to have my perspective changed. In order to increase my cultural competency with this group, I plan to become better acquainted with Bethlehem outside of work. Although I was already well acquainted with Yetsa, her Puerto Rican culture, Puerto Rican culture, we had never spoke specifics on some of the cultural celebrations within her culture. Before becoming acquainted with her, I thought she was Mexican and did not understand there was a difference. Two different locations, slightly different languages, and ethnic background. She stressed that to me. She chose to share her becoming of a woman because she felt like her culture empowered women in that way. This is known as a quinceañera, which is a celebration among Latino of a girl's 15th birthday and her transition from childhood to adulthood. The celebration is formal and women in that way. This is known as a quinceañera, which is a celebration among Latino of a girl's 15th birthday and her transition from childhood to adulthood. The celebration is formal and begins with a religious ceremony and a reception held in a home or banquet hall. The festivities include food, music, mainly, and choreographed dance performed by the quinceañera of her court. The skill development required us to demonstrate our ability to discuss newly culturally competent skills acquired during the semester. We critically reflect on each of the standards of cultural competence in social work practice. For each standard, we identify our goals to incorporate professional growth and development of a social action plan. In understanding the mechanisms of oppression and discrimination when working with diverse cultures, it is important to realize all cultures experience oppression and discrimination to some degree. Each culture will also view another as superior or dominant in relation to their own as well. Attempts to address and confront oppression of all vulnerable groups can be carried out through group discussions or interaction between two groups to put to rest any stereotypes or false accusations. In order to advance human rights